On the night of October 24th, 1942, Sergeant John Basilone crouched behind a Browning M, 1917, a one-machine gun, 1,000 yards south of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, listening to 3,000 Japanese soldiers singing in the darkness. The rain was falling in sheets. The mud was ankle-deep. His eyes were burning from exhaustion. He'd been awake for 48 hours. Basilone was 25 years old, a former army boxer from Raritan, New Jersey, who'd earned the nickname Manila John during a tour in the Philippines. He commanded 2 sections of heavy machine guns, 16 men total, 4 guns. They were positioned at Lunga Ridge, defending a narrow pass that led directly to the airfield behind them. If the Japanese broke through, Henderson Field would fall. If Henderson Field fell, Guadalcanal would fall. If Guadalcanal fell, the entire Allied strategy in the Pacific would collapse. Basilone knew this. Every Marine on that ridge knew this. They also knew that 3,000 enemy soldiers were about to attack their position. The math wasn't complicated. 3,000 against 16. The Japanese had mortars, grenades, and machine guns of their own. The Marines had 4 Browning 30s, whatever ammunition they could carry, and about 6 hours until dawn. Nobody expected Basilone's section to survive the night. But what the Japanese didn't know, what even Basilone's own commanders didn't fully understand, was that this sergeant from New Jersey was about to do something that would become legend in the Marine Corps. He was going to hold that line. For 3 days, through wave after wave of attacks, through equipment failures, ammunition shortages, and the deaths of nearly everyone around him. And he was going to do it because, in his own words later, somebody had to. The mission had started wrong from the beginning. The entire Guadalcanal campaign had been a desperate improvisation, thrown together with whatever forces and supplies the Navy could scrape up in the summer of 1942. Military historians would later call it Operation Shoestring. The Marines who fought there had other names for it. On August 7, 1942, 11,000 Marines from the 1st Marine Division landed on Guadalcanal and nearby islands in the Solomons. It was America's first major offensive operation of World War II. The Japanese had been building an airfield on Guadalcanal since early July. If they completed it, their bombers would control the sea lanes between the United States and Australia, effectively cutting off Australia from American support and putting the entire Southwest Pacific under Japanese control. The Marines took the airfield with almost no resistance. The Japanese construction workers fled into the jungle. By nightfall on August 8th, the Americans controlled what they renamed Henderson Field, a half-finished runway carved out of a coconut plantation near the coast. Then the Navy left. A Japanese naval force was approaching from the north. American carriers and transport ships withdrew to avoid destruction. The Marines were stranded on Guadalcanal with whatever supplies they'd managed to unload in 36 hours. No air cover, no naval support, no way to get reinforcements or resupply except by sporadic destroyer runs at night. The Japanese immediately began trying to retake the island. They sent infantry units down from their bases in the northern Solomons. They subjected the Marines to daily bombing raids and nightly naval bombardments. The battleships Congo and Haruna shelled Henderson Field from offshore, their 14-inch guns tearing up the runway, destroying aircraft, killing men in their sleep. The struggle for Guadalcanal became a brutal war of attrition, fought in some of the worst conditions on Earth. The heat was suffocating. Temperatures regularly exceeded 90 degrees with humidity near 100%. When it rained, and it rained constantly, the entire island turned into a swamp. The mud was so deep that men sank to their knees. Equipment rusted overnight. Fungal infections spread across skin faster than medics could treat them. Disease killed more Marines than combat. Malaria infected nearly everyone. Dysentery was universal. Dengue fever, scrub typhus, and a dozen other tropical illnesses swept through the ranks. Men lost 30, 40, 50 pounds. Their uniforms hung off skeletal frames. Their eyes were yellow from liver damage. They shook with fever, even in the oppressive heat. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button And let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The food was terrible, when there was food at all. Sea rations and captured Japanese rice. The water tasted like fuel because it was stored in old aviation gas drums. Fresh supplies came irregularly, usually dropped by Navy destroyers making high-speed runs past Japanese positions at night. Sometimes the destroyers got through. Sometimes they didn't. The 1st Marine Division was spread thin around Henderson Field's perimeter. The Lunga perimeter, as it was called, stretched roughly 5 miles along the coast and 3 miles inland. Barbed wire, machine gun emplacements, mortar pits, artillery positions. The Marines dug foxholes and waited for the next attack. The Japanese tried 3 times to retake Henderson Field before October 1942. Each time they failed, but each time they came closer to breaking through. The Battle of the Tenarue River in August, Edson's Ridge in September. Each engagement cost both sides hundreds of casualties. Each attack tested the Marines' ability to hold their defensive positions. John Basilone arrived on Guadalcanal on September 18, 1942, with the 7th Marine Regiment. The regiment landed as reinforcements for the exhausted units that had been holding the perimeter since August. Basilone was assigned to D Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. His commander was Lieutenant Colonel Louis B. Chesty Puller, already becoming a legend among Marines for his aggressive tactics and personal courage. Basilone was not a typical Marine sergeant. He'd enlisted in the Army in July 1934 at age 17. He served 3 years, most of it in the Philippines with the 31st Infantry Regiment. He was a championship boxer in Manila, fighting in the light heavyweight division. He won most of his matches. The other soldiers called him Manila John, and the nickname stuck for the rest of his life. After his discharge in 1937, Basilone worked as a truck driver in Maryland. He lasted 2 years. Civilian life didn't suit him. In July 1940, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. He went through training at Paris Island, Quantico, and New River, then was stationed at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. In January 1942, he was promoted to sergeant. Basilone's specialty was the Browning M 1917A1 machine gun. He'd learned the weapon in the Army, where machine gun training was more extensive than what the Marines provided. By the time he arrived on Guadalcanal, he was recognized as one of the best machine gunners in the Marine Corps. He understood the weapon's capabilities, its limitations, its quirks. He could clear jams by feel in complete darkness. He knew how to adjust for wind and distance. He could estimate ammunition consumption rates and predict when barrels would overheat. The Browning M 1917. A1 was a water-cooled, belt-fed machine gun that fired 30 caliber ammunition at a rate of 450 to 600 rounds per minute. It weighed 93 pounds with its tripod, water, and ammunition. The gun itself was 41 pounds. The tripod was 52 pounds. Add water for the cooling jacket and several belts of ammunition, and you needed at least 3 men to move it effectively. The weapon was a holdover from World War I, but it was still the best heavy machine gun available to American ground forces in 1942. It was reliable, accurate, and could sustain fire for hours if properly maintained. The water cooling system kept the barrel from overheating during sustained fire, unlike air-cooled weapons that needed frequent barrel changes. Each gun required a crew of 3 to 4 men: gunner, assistant gunner, ammunition carrier. The gunner aimed and fired. The assistant gunner fed the ammunition belt and watched for stoppages. The ammunition carriers kept the belt boxes full and carried spare barrels, water, and tools. In combat, roles blurred. Everyone learned every position. When men went down, others filled in. Basilone commanded 2 sections, 8 guns total, spread across about 200 yards of frontage at Lunga Ridge. The position was not ideal. The ridge was low and covered with jungle growth. Visibility was limited. Fields of fire were constricted by vegetation. But the ridge controlled the southern approach to Henderson Field, and it had to be held. By mid-October, the Japanese had built up their forces on Guadalcanal to around 15,000 men. They planned a major offensive to overwhelm the marine defenses and recapture the airfield. The assault would be coordinated with a naval bombardment and air attacks. The Japanese command believed that one massive push would succeed where previous smaller attacks had failed. Intelligence reports reached Marine commanders on October 23. Japanese forces were massing south and west of the perimeter. Large troop movements had been observed. Prisoners reported that an attack was imminent. The Marines went to full alert. Every man manned his position. Artillery was pre-registered on likely avenues of approach. Machine guns were sighted to create interlocking fields of fire. On the evening of October 23, Sergeant Ralph Briggs was on a listening post, 3,000 yards in front of the main lines. He and 46 other Marines had been sent out to provide early warning of Japanese movements. At 9:30 that night, Briggs called Lieutenant Colonel Puller's command post. "Colonel, there's about 3,000 Japanese between you and me." Puller asked if he was certain. "Positive. They've been all around us, singing and smoking, cigarettes, heading your way." The Japanese were confident. They sang military songs as they moved through the jungle. They smoked cigarettes without trying to conceal the glow. They talked and laughed. They believed they outnumbered the Americans so completely that stealth was unnecessary. There, commanders had told them the Marines were weak, demoralized, diseased. One more strong push would break them. Basilone heard the singing too. His position was closer to the Japanese assembly areas than Puller's command post. He could hear voices in the darkness, metal clanking against metal, boots squelching in mud. He checked his guns one more time. Ammunition belts were laid out and ready. Water jackets were full. Spare barrels were positioned where gunners could reach them. Headspace and timing were set correctly on every weapon. His men were terrified. Most of them were 18, 19, 20 years old. They'd been in combat before, but never against an assault of this magnitude. They'd heard the estimates. 3,000 Japanese soldiers, maybe more, against their small section of 16 men and 4 machine guns. The math was impossible. They were going to die on this ridge. Basilone moved from gun to gun, checking equipment, talking to his crews. He kept his voice calm and steady. He made jokes. He told them they'd be fine. The guns would do the work. Just keep feeding the belts and the guns would do the rest. Don't think about the numbers. Think about your sector, your field of fire, your gun. At approximately 10 o'clock on the night of October 24th, the Japanese artillery barrage began. Mortar rounds fell across the Marine positions. 75mm mountain gun shells exploded in the tree canopy, sending shrapnel and wood fragments down onto the foxholes. The bombardment lasted 20 minutes. It was designed to destroy the barbed wire, knock out machine gun positions, and demoralize the defenders. When the barrage lifted, the Japanese infantry came forward. Hundreds of soldiers moving through the darkness, screaming "Banzai" at the top of their lungs. They charged directly into the Marine positions, trying to overwhelm the defenses through sheer numbers and aggression. The first wave hit Basilone's section around 10:30. The machine guns opened fire. Tracers lit up the night. The sound was deafening. The Brownings hammered away at 450 rounds per minute. Brass casings piled up around the gun positions. The smell of cordite and gunpowder filled the air. The Japanese kept coming. When the first wave was cut down, a second wave came behind it. Then a third. The soldiers threw themselves at the barbed wire, forming human bridges for others to cross. They threw grenades. They fired light machine guns and rifles. Some got through the wire and engaged the Marines in close combat with bayonets and swords. Basilone was everywhere. He moved from gun to gun under fire, checking on his crews, helping clear jams, repositioning weapons to cover gaps in the line. When one gun crew was hit by a grenade and the gun went silent, Basilone ran 200 yards through enemy fire, carrying 90 pounds of gun, tripod, and ammunition. He set the weapon up in a new position and got it back into action before the Japanese could exploit the gap. The fighting continued for hours. Wave after wave of Japanese soldiers charged the Marine positions. The machine guns never stopped firing. Barrels glowed red-hot in the darkness. The water in the cooling jackets started to boil and steam. Gun crews poured anything liquid into the jackets to keep the weapons from seizing up. Water from canteens. Coffee. When those ran out, they urinated into the jackets, anything to keep the guns firing. Basilone lost his asbestos gloves early in the fight. The gloves were essential for handling the superheated barrels during barrel changes. Without them, touching the metal would burn skin instantly. Basilone changed barrels barehanded. He grabbed the scalding metal, pulled the old barrel out, slammed the new one in, and kept firing. His hands and forearms were covered in burns. He didn't stop. Around 1 in the morning, the intensity of the attack decreased slightly. The Japanese pulled back to regroup and bring up reinforcements. Basilone used the lull to check his positions. Half his men were casualties. 2 of his guns were out of action, damaged by grenades or mortar fire. Ammunition was running low. He estimated they had maybe 2 hours of sustained fire left at the current rate of consumption. He reported to Puller's command post. Marines there noticed Basilone was barefoot. His boots had been sucked off in the mud. His face was black with gunpowder residue and dirt. His eyes were bloodshot and staring. He asked for ammunition resupply. Puller ordered ammunition bearers to bring belts forward, but the supply lines had been cut. Japanese infiltrators were in the rear areas. The ammunition couldn't get through. Basilone made a decision. He would go get the ammunition himself. He took 2 Marines with him and moved back toward the supply dumps, several hundred yards behind the lines. Japanese soldiers were scattered throughout the area. Basilone and his men fought their way through, using pistols and machetes when they encountered enemy troops at close range. They reached the ammunition dump, loaded up with as many belt boxes as they could carry, and fought their way back to the gun positions. Each belt box contained 250 rounds and weighed about 20 pounds. Basilone was carrying 4 boxes, plus his pistol and machete. 80 pounds of ammunition across several hundred yards of jungle, in the dark, through enemy-held territory. He made it back. His guns kept firing. The Japanese attacked again around 2 in the morning. This assault was even larger than the first. More than 1,000. Soldiers pushed forward against Basilone's section of the line. The remaining 2 operational machine guns fired continuously. Basilone manned 1 gun himself after its gunner was killed. He fired for over an hour straight, traversing left and right across his sector, pouring rounds into the billets. Attacking formations. Bodies were piling up in front of the positions. Literally piling up. The dead stacked so high they began to block the guns' fields of fire. Basilone had to send men forward, under fire, to physically push the corpses aside so the machine guns could engage targets beyond the wall of bodies. The scene was surreal and horrifying. The smell of blood and ruptured intestines mixed with gunpowder and burning vegetation. Another gun went down, jammed irreparably. Basilone abandoned it and consolidated his remaining crew onto the last operational weapon. 1 gun left. 1 gun. To hold 200 yards of front line against more than 1,000 attacking soldiers. The gun fired without stopping. The barrel temperature was so high the water in the cooling jacket had completely boiled away. Steam hissed from the vents. The metal glowed cherry red. Basilone pulled the gun off its tripod and fired from the hip. Without the tripod's weight, he could move faster, reposition more quickly. He walked the firing line, shooting at any movement in front of the position. Spent casings bounced off his legs. The barrel burned through what remained of his sleeves. He didn't stop. Dawn came around 6 in the morning. The Japanese pulled back. They'd been attacking for 8 straight hours. Thousands of their soldiers were dead or wounded. They had not taken the ridge. Basilone and what remained of his section had held. Just barely. But they'd held. The battlefield was covered in bodies. Japanese dead were scattered across the approaches to the marine positions. Some estimates put the number at over 800 in Basilone's sector alone. Basilone himself was credited with at least 38 confirmed kills, though the actual number was almost certainly higher. Many of the dead had been killed by machine gun fire. But there was no way to determine which gunner had killed which soldier. Basilone's surviving men were beyond exhaustion. They'd been awake for over 60 hours. They were dehydrated, hungry, and suffering from the first symptoms of malaria and dysentery. Their hands shook uncontrollably. Some vomited from nervous exhaustion. One Marine sat in his foxhole and stared at nothing, completely unresponsive. Basilone checked the gun positions. One weapon was still operational, barely. The others were damaged beyond field repair. Dead Marines lay in and around the gun pits. Basilone knew every name. He'd trained with these men, eaten with them, lived in the same tents back at camp. Now they were gone. He expected reinforcements to arrive, someone to relieve his position, let his men rest. No one came. The entire perimeter was under attack. Every unit was engaged. There were no reserves. Basilone's section would have to hold for another night. The day of October 25th was spent preparing for the next assault. Basilone scrounged spare parts from damaged guns, cannibalized components, and managed to get 2 weapons back into working order. He sent scavenging parties to strip ammunition from dead soldiers, both Marine and Japanese. Every belt counted. He repositioned his remaining gun crews to cover the most likely avenues of approach. The Japanese artillery started again at dusk, heavier than the Prost night before. The enemy commanders knew they'd been stopped at this sector. They concentrated their fire on Basilone's positions, trying to destroy the machine guns before the next infantry assault. Shells landed directly in the gun pits. One gun was blown apart. Another Marine died. Basilone was down to 1 operational weapon and fewer than 10 men capable of fighting. The ammunition situation was critical. He estimated they had enough for maybe 2 hours of sustained fire. After that, they'd be fighting with pistols and whatever they could find. The second night's attack began around 10 o'clock. The Japanese came with even more determination than before. They'd brought flamethrowers and satchel charges. They were going to break through no matter the cost. The last machine gun fired into the darkness. Basilone fed the belt himself, watching the rounds count down. 200 left. 150. 100. When the ammunition ran out just before dawn, on October 26th, Basilone fought with his Colt M 1911, a 1-pistol and a machete he'd taken from a supply tent. Japanese soldiers came over the barbed wire. Basilone shot them at arm's length. When the pistol ran dry, he used the machete. He fought hand-to-hand in the dark, slashing and clubbing with the blade. Other Marines joined him, the few who could still stand. They fought with entrenching tools, rifle butts, fists, anything. The Japanese broke through in several places, but were driven back by desperate counterattacks. The fighting was savage and personal. Men died inches apart. Reinforcements finally arrived around dawn. Fresh Marines from reserve positions sent to shore up the collapsing line. They found Basilone standing in a gun pit surrounded by bodies, covered in blood, most of it not his own. He was holding a machine gun barrel that was so hot it had burned through the metal water jacket. His hands were raw meat. His eyes were vacant from exhaustion and combat stress. Private First Class Nash Phillips, one of Basilone's ammunition carriers, described what he saw. Basilone had a machine gun on the go for 3 days and nights without sleep, rest, or food. He was barefooted, and his eyes were red as fire. His face was dirty black from gunfire and lack of sleep. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his shoulders. He had a .45 tucked into the waistband of his trousers. The battle for Henderson Field ended on October 26th. The Japanese had launched their largest offensive of the Guadalcanal campaign and failed. Casualties were catastrophic on both sides. The Japanese lost more than 2,000 killed. The Marines lost over 200. But Henderson Field remained in American hands. The airfield that the Japanese so desperately needed to control was still operational, still launching strikes against their forces. Basilone's section had held the critical southern approach, against impossible odds, for 3 days, with minimal support, through equipment failures, ammunition shortages, and the near-total annihilation of his unit. He'd kept 1 machine gun firing when everything else had failed. He'd fought hand-to-hand when the ammunition ran out. He'd refused to abandon his position even when retreat would have been justified. Lieutenant Colonel Puller recommended Basilone for the Medal of Honor. The citation would read that Basilone had contributed in large measure to the virtual annihilation of a Japanese regiment. That regiment, the 29th Infantry of the Sendai Division, had numbered approximately 3,000 men before the attack. After 3 days of fighting Basilone and the other defenders at Lunga Ridge, it effectively ceased to exist as a combat unit. The Medal of Honor was approved rapidly by military standards. On May 21, 1943, in a ceremony in Australia, Basilone received America's highest military decoration. He was the first enlisted Marine to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. When asked about his actions, Basilone deflected the praise. "Only part of this medal belongs to me," he said. "Pieces of it belong to the boys who are still on Guadalcanal. It was rough as hell down there." The Marine Corps brought Basilone back to the United States for a war bonds tour. He was a genuine hero at a time when America desperately needed heroes. The newspapers called him the Marine, who proved the Japanese weren't invincible. Crowds mobbed him at rallies. He appeared alongside movie stars and politicians. A parade was held in his hometown of Raritan, New Jersey. 30,000 people lined the streets. Basilone hated it. He was uncomfortable with the attention, embarrassed by the praise. He was a machine gunner, not a celebrity. His job was to kill the enemy and keep his men alive, not to sell bonds and pose for photographs. He made his feelings clear to his superiors. He wanted to go back to combat. He wanted to be with Marines, not civilians. The Corps offered him a commission and a posting as an instructor at a stateside training base. He refused. "I'm just a plain soldier," he said, "and I want to stay one. I ain't no officer, and I ain't no museum piece. I belong back with my outfit." His request was denied. The Marine Corps determined that Basilone was more valuable as a symbol than as a combatant. He was assigned to Camp Pendleton in California to train new machine gunners. He spent 1943 and most of 1944 teaching young Marines the skills he'd learned in combat: how to clear jams by feel, how to estimate barrel temperature, how to position guns for interlocking fields of fire. He was good at it, patient, thorough, demanding. The Marines he trained would use those skills in battles across the Pacific. Many would credit Basilone's instruction with saving their lives, but teaching wasn't combat, and Basilone wanted to fight. In late 1944, the Marine Corps finally relented. Basilone was reassigned to C Company, 1st Battalion, 27th Marines, 5th Marine Division. The division was preparing for an invasion. The target was a small volcanic island in the Bonin chain, about 660 miles south of Tokyo. The island was called Iwo Jima. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Iwo Jima was 8 square miles of volcanic ash and rock dominated by Mount Suribachi, a dormant volcano at the southern tip. The island had 3 airfields. Japanese forces had spent months fortifying the island with an elaborate network of tunnels, bunkers, and gun positions. 21,000 Japanese troops were dug in, commanded by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, one of Japan's most capable defensive strategists. The American plan called for a massive amphibious assault. The 5th Marine Division would land on the western beaches. The 4th Marine Division would take the eastern beaches. The 3rd Marine Division would be held in reserve. The objective was to capture the airfields and neutralize the island as a base for Japanese fighters that were intercepting B-29 bombers on their way to raid the Japanese home islands. Naval intelligence estimated the island could be secured in 5 days. That estimate would prove catastrophically wrong. The battle would last 36 days. It would become one of the bloodiest engagements in Marine Corps history. More medals of honor would be awarded for actions on Iwo Jima than any other battle in American history. 27 total, 14 of them posthumous. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone landed with the first wave on February 19, 1945. The beaches were designated by color. Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2, Yellow Beach 1. Basilone's unit, C Company, 1st Battalion, 27th Marines, was assigned to Red Beach 2, on the western side of the island, directly below Mount Suribachi. The landing craft hit the beach at 9 o'clock in the morning. The Marines poured out and immediately sank into volcanic ash. The beach wasn't sand. It was fine black volcanic particles that gave way under every step. Men sank to their ankles, their knees. The ash-clogged weapons got into eyes and mouths. Movement was exhausting. Every step required twice the effort of walking on normal ground. For the first few minutes, there was almost no enemy fire. The Japanese were holding their positions, waiting for the beaches to fill with Marines and equipment. Then the bombardment started. Artillery, mortars, and machine gun fire erupted from positions all across the island. The Japanese had pre-registered every inch of the beach. They knew exactly where to aim. Shells landed with devastating accuracy. Marines died before they got off the beach. The volcanic ash made it impossible to dig proper foxholes. Men tried to scrape shallow depressions for cover, but the loose ash kept collapsing. Landing craft backed off the beach and hit mines. Amtraks were destroyed by artillery fire. Bodies floated in the surf. The water turned red. Basilone's company was supposed to advance inland toward airfield number 1, about 800 yards from the beach, but the beach was a killing ground. Marines were pinned down by fire from bunkers and pillboxes that had survived the naval bombardment. The advance stalled within minutes of landing. Basilone saw the problem immediately. A Japanese blockhouse was firing on the Marines from a fortified position to the left of the beach. The structure was made of reinforced concrete, proof against everything except a direct hit from naval gunfire. Machine gun ports faced the beach. The Japanese gunners had perfect fields of fire. They were methodically killing Marines as they tried to move inland. Someone had to destroy that blockhouse. Basilone volunteered. He grabbed a satchel charge and several grenades and moved toward the position under fire. The blockhouse was maybe 50 yards inland, positioned on slightly higher ground. Basilone crawled through the volcanic ash, using the terrain for cover. Japanese bullets kicked up black dust around him. He reached the blockhouse and climbed on top of it. The Japanese inside had no way to engage him. Their weapons were fixed to fire outward at the beach, not straight up. Basilone dropped grenades through the ventilation ports. The explosions inside killed some of the garrison. He placed the satchel charge against a weak point in the structure and lit the fuse. Then he ran. The charge detonated. The blockhouse collapsed inward. The machine gun fire stopped. Marines who'd been pinned down by that position were able to advance. Basilone moved to the next strong point, another pillbox, this one, firing on Marines trying to get off the beach. He used the same tactics. Grenades first, then demolition charges. The position was destroyed, its garrison dead. Basilone was everywhere on the beach that morning, moving from position to position, destroying strong points, leading Marines forward. A Marine tank had gotten stuck in the volcanic ash and was immobilized. Japanese artillery had the tank ranged in. Shells were landing all around it. The crew couldn't move, couldn't escape. They were going to be killed. Basilone ran to the tank under fire. He guided the crew through the process of freeing the vehicle from the ash, directing them to rock the tank back and forth, telling them exactly when to apply power. Artillery shells exploded nearby. Shrapnel flew through the air. Basilone stood in the open, completely exposed, calmly directing the tank crew until the vehicle was free and could move to cover. His actions allowed C Company to advance off the beach. Other units saw what Basilone was doing and followed his example. Marines started moving inland, taking ground yard by yard through concentrated enemy fire. The advance was slow and costly, but it was happening. The invasion was succeeding, barely, and Basilone's leadership was a significant factor in that success. Around noon, Basilone was moving forward with a small group of Marines near the edge of airfield number 1. They were advancing on foot, scanning for enemy positions. Japanese forces had retreated into their tunnel networks, but were still firing from concealed positions. Mortar fire was constant. Shells landed randomly across the battlefield, making any movement dangerous. A mortar round landed directly next to Basilone. The explosion killed him instantly. He was 28 years old. He'd been on Iwo Jima for approximately 3 hours. The Marines who were with him said he never knew what hit him. One moment he was moving forward, directing his men. The next moment he was gone. The Marine Corps awarded Basilone the Navy Cross posthumously for his actions on Iwo Jima. The citation described how he had destroyed the blockhouse single-handedly, how he had saved the tank crew, how his intrepid initiative, outstanding professional skill, and valiant spirit of self-sacrifice in the face of fanatic opposition contributed materially to the advance of his company during the early critical period of the assault. John Basilone became the only enlisted Marine in World War II to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. No other enlisted Marine achieved that distinction during the war. The combination of decorations represented extraordinary valor in 2 separate campaigns, in 2 completely different tactical situations, against the same enemy. The news of Basilone's death reached the United States several days later. Newspapers across the country ran the story. The hero of Guadalcanal, the Marine who'd held off 3,000 Japanese soldiers, had been killed on another island in another desperate battle. The public mourned. Marines mourned. His family in Raritan, New Jersey, mourned. His widow, Sergeant Lena May Riggi, whom Basilone had married during his time at Camp Pendleton, received the notification while she was serving as a Marine herself. She'd met Basilone in 1944, while both were stationed at Pendleton. They'd been married for less than 7 months when he shipped out for Iwo Jima. She would spend the rest of her life honoring his memory, never remarrying, always identifying herself as Mrs. John Basilone. The battle for Iwo Jima continued for another month after Basilone's death. The Marines took the island yard by yard, cave by cave, bunker by bunker. The fighting was brutal beyond description. The Japanese refused to surrender. They fought to the death in their tunnels, often taking Marines with them in final suicidal attacks. By the time the island was declared secure on March 26, 1945, American casualties totaled 26,038. 6,821 killed. 19,217 wounded. Nearly 1/3 of all Marines who landed on Iwo Jima became casualties. Japanese casualties were even higher. Of the 21,000 defenders, only 1,083 were captured. The rest died fighting. General Kuribayashi was never found. He probably died in the final days of the battle, leading a last desperate counterattack, though his body was never identified. The strategic value of Iwo Jima became apparent in the months after its capture. The island's airfields were used by damaged B-29 bombers, making emergency landings after raids on Japan. Over 2,400 B-29s landed on Iwo Jima during the final months of the war. Each bomber carried an 11-man crew. Those 2,400 emergency landings potentially saved 26,400 lives. The island also became a base for P-51 Mustang fighters that escorted the bombers to Japan, significantly reducing bomber losses. Military historians still debate whether the casualties suffered taking Iwo Jima were justified by the island's strategic value. The debate is academic for the men who fought there. They had their orders, they executed the mission, they paid the price. John Basilone was among those who paid. Basilone was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, in Section 12, Site 384. The funeral was held with full military honors. Marines in dress blues carried the casket. A rifle salute was fired. Taps was played. The flag that had draped his casket was folded and presented to his family. His grave marker is simple. His name, his rank, his decorations, Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, the dates of his birth and death. The Marine Corps ensured that Basilone's legacy would endure. Ships were named in his honor. On December 21, 1945, Lena May Basilone christened the destroyer USS Basilone, hull number DD 824. Ship served in the Navy until 1977, participating in operations during the Korean War and the Vietnam War. In 2022, a second ship was commissioned, USS John Basilone, DDG 122, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. The ship is currently in active service. Roads were named after Basilone. Schools, libraries, bridges. In Raritan, New Jersey, his hometown, an entire section of Route 28 was designated the Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone Memorial Highway. A memorial statue was erected in downtown Raritan in 2017, showing Basilone in combat gear, looking out across the Raritan River. Every year on the Sunday closest to his birthday, the town holds a parade in his honor. The Marine Corps uses Basilone's story in training. His actions at Guadalcanal are studied in leadership courses, analyzed for lessons in small unit tactics, crew-served weapons employment, and decision-making under extreme stress. His refusal to accept a commission and safe stateside posting is presented as an example of dedication to the Corps and to fellow Marines. What makes Basilone's story remarkable is not just what he did, but what he chose to do. At Guadalcanal, he held an impossible position against overwhelming odds because it was his job and his men were counting on him. That was duty. But after Guadalcanal, he had a choice. He'd earned the Medal of Honor. He'd been offered a commission. He could have spent the rest of the war training recruits in California, safe, comfortable, alive. He chose to go back. He went back because, in his own words, he was a plain soldier and wanted to stay one. He went back because his fellow Marines were fighting and dying while he was selling war bonds. He went back because being safe, while others were in danger, was intolerable to him. That choice, that decision to return to combat when he had every reason not to, defines who John Basilone was. The mythology around Basilone has grown over the decades. Some accounts exaggerate his kills at Guadalcanal. Some claim he single-handedly stopped the entire Japanese assault. The reality is impressive enough without embellishment. He commanded 2 sections of machine guns under impossible conditions. He kept those guns firing through 3 days of sustained attacks. He resupplied his position under fire. He fought, hand to hand, when ammunition ran out. And he refused to abandon his position even when doing so would have been reasonable. At Iwo Jima, he destroyed fortified positions that were stopping the advance. He saved a tank crew. He led Marines off a killing ground. He did his job until a mortar shell ended his life. There was nothing mythological about it. It was just a Marine doing what Marines do: fighting, leading, dying, if necessary. The men who served with Basilone described him as calm under fire, technically proficient, physically tough, and completely focused on the mission. He didn't panic. He didn't freeze. He assessed situations, made decisions, executed. When equipment failed, he fixed it. When men were wounded, he got them to safety. When ammunition ran low, he went and got more. Everything else was secondary to accomplishing the mission and protecting his Marines. Private First Class Nash Phillips, who watched Basilone fight at Guadalcanal, said something that captures the essence of who Basilone was. He'll never be dead in my mind. From a Marine who saw Basilone at his worst and his best, dirty and exhausted and fighting for his life, says more than any official citation or biography ever could. Basilone didn't see himself as special. He was a machine gunner. He'd learned the trade in the army, perfected it in the Marines, and applied it in combat. When asked about his Medal of Honor, he deflected credit to the men who died at Guadalcanal. When offered rewards for his heroism, he asked to go back to combat. When he died on Iwo Jima, he died doing what he'd chosen to do, fighting alongside Marines. The ultimate legacy of John Basilone is not the medals or the ships or the monuments. It's the standard he set. He showed what one Marine with courage, skill, and determination could accomplish against impossible odds. He demonstrated that leadership means being at the front, taking the same risks you ask your men to take. He proved that duty sometimes requires sacrifice, and that sacrifice can mean giving up safety, to return to danger. Every Marine who's learned about Basilone whether in boot camp or officer training or machine gun school, has absorbed that lesson. The Corps tells his story because it embodies the values the Corps tries to instill: honor, courage, commitment, not as abstract concepts, but as concrete actions, holding a position when retreat would be easier, going back to combat when staying home would be safer, doing the hard right instead of the easy wrong. Basilone's grave at Arlington is visited regularly. Veterans leave coins on the headstone, a military tradition indicating respect. Marines leave challenge coins from their units. Sometimes there are flowers, sometimes small American flags. The grave is never forgotten, never neglected. In 2010, HBO produced a miniseries called The Pacific, based on the experiences of Marines fighting in the Pacific. Theatre. John Basilone was one of 3 central characters. Actor John Seda portrayed him. The series showed Guadalcanal, the War Bonds tour, the training at Camp Pendleton, his marriage to Lena May, and finally Iwo Jima. The series brought Basilone's story to a new generation, millions of viewers, who'd never heard of Guadalcanal or Lunga Ridge or the battle for Henderson Field. The portrayal was generally accurate. The series showed the brutal conditions on Guadalcanal, the exhaustion, the disease, the constant danger. It showed Basilone's skill with the machine gun, his leadership under fire, his refusal to leave his men. It showed his discomfort with celebrity during the War Bonds tour, and it showed Iwo Jima, the chaos of the landing, the destruction of the blockhouse, and the mortar round that killed him. Veterans who'd known Basilone or served with him generally approved of the portrayal. It showed the reality of what they'd experienced, the fear, the fatigue, the moments of dark humor that kept men sane. The series didn't romanticize combat, it showed it as ugly, terrifying, and necessary. That accuracy mattered to the veterans. Their war, their sacrifices, were being shown honestly. The real question about John Basilone is not what he did, but why. Why did he hold that position at Guadalcanal when falling back would have been understandable? Why did he go back to combat when he could have stayed safe? Why did he risk everything twice and ultimately lose? Everything on Iwo Jima? The answer is probably simpler than it appears. Basilone was a professional. He'd chosen the military as his career, first in the army, then in the Marines. Being a professional meant doing the job regardless of difficulty or danger. It meant competence, reliability, and commitment. When the job required holding a position, you held it. When the job required going back to combat, you went. It wasn't complicated. It was just the job. But there was more to it than professionalism. Basilone cared about the Marines he served with. He'd trained them, fought beside them, watched them die. When he was stateside selling war bonds, those Marines were still fighting, still dying. He felt that separation as a betrayal, even though he'd earned the right to stay safe. His place was with them, not with civilians who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. The Marine Corps understands this. It's why Basilone's story is told and retold. It's why his example is held up to every generation of Marines. He represents the ideal, the warrior who fights not for glory or recognition, but because his brothers need him. The leader who doesn't ask his men to do anything he won't do himself. The professional who executes the mission regardless of cost. John Basilone died 79 years ago. Everyone who knew him personally is gone now. The Marines he fought with at Guadalcanal are dead. The men he trained at Camp Pendleton are dead. Lena May Basilone died in 1999. The generation that fought World War II is nearly extinct. But Basilone's legacy persists. It persists because the Marine Corps won't let it die. Every Marine learns about Chesty Puller and John Basilone and Dan Daly and the other legends of the Corps. They learn the stories, absorb the lessons, and carry those examples into their own service. When a Marine faces a difficult situation, when the mission seems impossible, when survival seems unlikely, he remembers that other Marines have faced worse and prevailed. Basilone held Lunga Ridge. If he could do that, you can do this. That's the power of his legacy. It's not about worship or myth-making, it's about providing a standard, an example, Proof that ordinary men can do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. Basilone was from New Jersey. He was a truck driver. He dropped out of school at 15. Nothing about his background suggested he would become one of the most decorated Marines in history. But when the moment came, he rose to it. Twice. The lesson is that heroes are made, not born. They're made by circumstances, by choices, by the willingness to do what needs to be done regardless of fear or danger. Basilone was afraid at Guadalcanal. He had to be. 3,000 Japanese soldiers were trying to kill him. Fear is the rational response to that situation, but fear didn't stop him from doing his job. It didn't stop him from keeping his guns firing, resupplying under fire, fighting, hand to hand when ammunition ran out. At Iwo Jima, he knew the dangers. He'd been in combat before. He knew that attacking fortified positions meant high casualties. He knew that many Marines would die on those beaches. He went anyway. He led from the front, destroyed the blockhouse, saved the tank, crew, and died doing his job. That's not fearlessness. That's courage. Courage is being afraid and doing the hard thing anyway. The Marine Corps teaches that courage is contagious. When one Marine shows courage, others follow. When Basilone kept his guns firing at Guadalcanal, the Marines around him kept fighting. They saw their sergeant refusing to quit, and they refused to quit. When Basilone destroyed the blockhouse on Iwo Jima, other Marines saw it and pushed forward. Leadership by example, the most powerful form of leadership. In the end, John Basilone's story is about duty fulfilled. He had a job. He did it. When the job required holding an impossible position, he held it. When the job required going back to war, he went. When the job required sacrificing his life, he gave it. No hesitation, no complaints, no excuses. Just a Marine doing his job. That's why his memory endures. That's why ships bear his name, why statues honor his memory, why the Marine Corps tells his story to every new generation. Not because he was superhuman, but because he was deeply human, afraid but brave, exhausted but determined, offered safety but choosing danger because his brothers were still fighting. The inscription on the statue in Raritan, New Jersey, reads simply, Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, Medal of Honor, Navy Cross. No flowery language, no elaborate praise, just his rank, his decorations, and the implicit message. This is what a Marine looks like. For the Marines who visit his grave at Arlington, who see his statue in Raritan, who learn his story in training, that message is clear. You are capable of more than you think. When the situation is desperate, when survival seems impossible, when everyone is counting on you, you can rise to the occasion. Basilone proved it, and if he could do it, so can you. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.